Right now, in an effort to fulfill the terms of the agreement leading to the suspension of the minimum wage strike, President Bola Tinubu has directed his Minister of Finance and Coordinating Minister for the Economy, Wale Edun, to analyze the numbers and propose a new national minimum wage figure that would be presented to labor unions today. This directive came at the end of a meeting between labor leaders, government's negotiating team in Abuja. The delegation, led by Secretary to the Government of the Federation, George Akume, including Finance Minister Wale Edun, Budget Minister Atiku Bagudu, Minister of State for Labor Nkiruka Onyejocha, and Information and National Orientation Minister Mohammed Idris. Also present were the Group CEO of Nigerian National Petroleum Corporation Limited, Mele Kyari, and Chief of Staff to the President, Femi Gbajabiamila. The meeting came in the wake of government's promise on Monday night to increase the national minimum wage above 60,000 naira.
The President has directed the Minister of Finance to do the numbers and get back to him between today and tomorrow, so that we can have some figures ready for negotiation with labor. Let me say that Mr. President is determined to go with what the committee has said. He is also looking at the welfare of Nigerians. Like I've said earlier, government is not against, it's not an opponent of labor discussions, it's not an opponent of wage increase. But what is there is that government is always desirous of ensuring that there is a balance between what government pronouncement is and what the realities are on ground. And therefore, we'll work assiduously to ensure that whatever we do, whatever promises the government makes will be kept. That's the idea of this meeting. The President has given a marching order that all those who have negotiated on behalf of government and all those also who are representative of other sectors, the organized private sector, the subnationals, come together so that we can have a new wage award that is acceptable, that is sustainable, and that is also realistic for Nigeria.
Mohammed Idris, Minister of Information there, but we have now joining us a senior analyst with SBM Intelligence, Oluseyi Awojulugbe, to discuss the national minimum wage matter and the ability or otherwise of state governors and the private sector to pay. And what should be a fair national minimum wage, fair to the federal government, states and the private sector? Good afternoon. It's good to have you with us.
Good afternoon. It's a pleasure to be here.
All right. Very good. So what would be a fair national minimum wage by your reckoning and judging by the current state of the economy, you think?
Well, it would be hard to throw around figures right now because when you're talking about minimum wage issues, there are things around, is it sustainable? Would they be able to pay? Already, we have about 15 states, according to budgets, who currently do not pay the 30,000 minimum wage. So if you're talking about increasing the minimum wage, you should be asking, will these people, will the states and even private sector be able to pay? So I don't think it's best at this point to be throwing around figures. We wait to see what the Minister of Economy, Wale Edun, will come up with when he comes up with that new template to see what he thinks that, and of course that would be even from the federal government's perspective. We'll still wait to hear from the organized private sector to see what they can pay sustainably over a long period of time.
Okay.
All right. Now, I know you don't want to throw around figures, but it's difficult to have this conversation without, analyzing what numbers look like. I love the fact that you work with geopolitics, right? So let's take the conversation there. Everybody's throwing around minimum wage in oil-producing nations at the moment, especially African nations. And Nigeria sits at the bottom of that list. Let's look at Angola as a case study where there was a similar situation. Labor in Angola threatened to strike earlier in the year. And the president issued a decree, that increased minimum wage. Now, the lowest earner, who is said to be a cleaner in the civil service, earns $120 a month. Mm-hmm. Now, what is it that is keeping Nigeria at the bottom of the list of African oil-producing nations offering the least minimum wage?
Okay, great. So when you're trying to compare Nigeria to other oil-producing countries, we've seen people who try to even make comparisons with countries like Saudi Arabia. Now, there are things that you have to put in context that gives you a clearer picture of what it is. In Angola, for example, you would look at what kind of investments do they have in their oil and gas sector. Nigeria's oil and gas sector has not attracted any significant investment in the past decade. as far as the past decade. So, and these investments, whether not even just from the oil and gas sector, but from other sectors within the economy, are what determines the money available within the economy, and that money is what will be used to pay wages and salaries within the economy. You should also look at the government spending and the government's debt burden, and even the oil production numbers. Recently, we had the issue where the Total CEO said they were moving some investments that people thought were going to be Nigeria's to Angola. Those are all the factors that need to be placed side by side when you're talking about, or when you're making a comparison between countries, to say it's not just about whether this country is an oil producing nation or not, but there are other things that need to be put in perspective.
And sorry, Lee, very quickly before you go in. So it sounds like you're making a case to say that Nigeria possibly can't afford $120 as a minimum wage. It sounds like you're making a case for that.
Well, I wouldn't say that Nigeria cannot afford. We already know in Nigeria there's already this conversation about reducing the cost of governance. So I know that as we know, when you're trying to make a budget, you cut here, you cut there, and add here and add there. Those all this plus and minus. So if we can get to a place where the governments can pay, or even the economy can support now, so that's another thing within the minimum wage arguments. The economy, can it support whatever minimum wage? It's not about just paying 600,000 naira. It's about what it does to inflation and things like that. And Nigeria is already battling with record high inflation numbers. So Nigeria can certainly get to a place where the economy can support $120 per month minimum wage. But I don't think that $120, for example, is not something that we can do at this moment.
All right, Chi. In other parts of the narratives, critics have argued there's been low emphasis on the proposed hike in electricity tariffs during negotiations between Labour and, of course, the federal government, and more attention has been paid to the minimum wage issue. And there's a lot of discontent out there regarding that, because people are even saying, okay, fine, over 90% of the people don't actually work in the civil service, and why is the Labour actually fighting for their cause in the true sense of the word? So I'd like your thoughts on that scenario, because that's what people are saying now. When you talk to people out there, and it's like, okay, fine, what about our needs as well? And why do we have to go through all of this pains, with a strike? And it's been emphasis on the minimum wage.
Well, certainly. It's not out of the ordinary that Labour would focus their attention on minimum wage, because their primary constituency that they represent, using the Nigerian parlance, is their civil servants and workers within the economy.
Well, it was part of the cardinal, arguments they put forward. Towards this just before the strike, but the emphasis has been on minimum wage. Exactly,
but Labour's argument has been that, well, we need you to increase the minimum wage because workers are paying higher on electricity, they're paying higher to buy food and rent, and of course we know with the cost of living crisis that is currently going on within the economy. So if people are saying that it would have been a better argument for Labour to speak more or focus more attention on the electricity tariff, they may have a point.
And all the social infrastructure needs as well.
Exactly. They may have a point, and those are some of the things that we hope that Labour can also do going forward. That it's not just about civil servants, it's not just about what the minimum wage is. There are a lot of issues that are affecting the Nigerian citizenry that is beyond the minimum wage figure.
I love that we're on this point, because at the end of the day, let's say that the federal government, the states, private sector, based off of the current situation the economy finds itself in, cannot afford a substantial minimum or even living wage. So what happens next? Because the reality is that incomes have been eroded.
Yes.
So it's not fair for the government to just say, well, we can't afford. It's not fair to say, well, we're going to offer 60,001, since they said above 60,001 naira, because that's the best we can do. Where does a nation move forward? And you've already, chimed in about, social security nets that need to be created. But where can we take this conversation if we reach a deadlock where government said, well, this is what we've got?
Well,
what are some of your suggestions?
In an ideal scenario, the best thing would have been that Nigeria does not have a pegged minimum wage figure. It would have been best if wages are reviewed annually in line with inflation. So that way, employers can plan to review wages. Workers can know that they are getting something and they can afford and maintain a certain lifestyle or a certain standard that they have built for themselves and their families. So in an ideal scenario, in an ideal situation, that would have been the best thing for Nigeria to do, because businesses, workers, even citizens in general suffered over the past 2 days with the blackouts and even fuel queues because fuel stations were shutting down. Yeah. So really, it's hopeful. We know with the Buhari administration, that was when we got the Minimum Wage Act reviewed, and we saw that we can anticipate a review every 5 years. But we hope that the conversation can get to a place where the government would commit to reviewing minimum wage, and even employers. We know that within the economy right now, some employers do sort of a living adjustment on salaries every year. So we hope that this can also be replicated by the government so that everyone can live well, if I may put it like that, in addition to the social security nets that I've been talking about.
Jay, I'm glad you mentioned the word living. We're talking about, we're not even talking about living wage. Is more about the minimum wage, as it were, and that's the most important one. But let's talk about other issues now. Talking about the ability to pay, what will it take for the government to prune down its own expenditure on non-essential functions, especially when we talk about the largesse, being banded every now and then in the National Assembly, being appropriated and spent by them, and how justifiable. These are the things that labor is also looking at, workers are looking at. If they're seeing all of this, you're not giving them that, you're giving them that impression that, okay, fine, if they can afford this, they can as well spend more on them as well. So all these expenses in that narrative, your thoughts? So
really, I was, just before coming into the studio, I was reading comments from Mr. Tedo Peterside, who said the government has given workers the impression that there's money, there's cash, and so they can afford to give 90 billion to a certain arm of government and all of that. But really, when you look at the budget figures, when you look at the numbers, that cash doesn't exist. And during the electionary season, we had one of the major candidates was saying that Nigeria should not be borrowing to pay salaries, because that we've seen that was the situation. Yeah. For example, in the 2024 budget figures, government salaries, staff salaries, personnel cost was estimated at 6 trillion, while debt service was estimated at 8 trillion. So really, Nigeria was proposing to spend more on servicing debts than paying personnel. So really, when you talk about sustainability. Well. So really, Nigeria was going to spend more on debt to service the debt. And so that shows that really that money that seems to be shared at a certain level, it doesn't exist. It doesn't exist.
Well, I know a big part of society will feel like this imaginary money should also not exist in their accounts. Let's all, benefit from these debts of money that doesn't exist, because it seems only just a fraction of society are enjoying this non-existent money. But Oluseyi Awojulugbe, thank you so much. This has been an insightful conversation. Really enjoyed having you here.
Thank you very much.